It was late October 2022. I remember the exact week because I had just quit my job. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents, that I was heading out into the woods. I'd had enough of people for a while, enough of looking over my shoulder, enough of acting normal. I needed to breathe somewhere quiet and cold, somewhere I wouldn't bump into anyone I knew. 3 months earlier, my boss's mother had died. Her name was Jean. Everyone in the office liked her or pretended they did. She wasn't someone I ever really got to know personally, but I saw her often enough. She'd visit our small logistics office every month or two to check in with her son, David. Sometimes she'd bring cookies or sandwiches, always store-bought, always with a tight-lipped smile. Jean reminded me of the kind of woman who used to be a teacher or a nurse, the kind who had too much control and not enough warmth. She wore those big coats with flower prints and always parked perfectly straight. I wouldn't have thought about her much at all if it wasn't for what happened after she died. I was the one who hit her. It was a rainy Wednesday morning. I had worked late the night before, was running on 4 hours of sleep, and was in a rush to make it to a meeting. I didn't even see her step into the crosswalk. I was doing just under the limit, maybe 35, but she came out from between 2 parked cars without looking. I hit the brakes too late. The sound of her head hitting the windshield still hasn't left me. I can picture the spiderweb crack in the glass and her face, limp and sideways on the asphalt. She died on the spot. They said later she was carrying some paperwork for her son. She was always helping him out with office errands. The police said it wasn't my fault. She hadn't looked. I hadn't been speeding. There was no alcohol, no drugs, no phone involved. Just rain, tiredness, and bad timing. Her son, my boss, didn't say much to me after that, just nodded when we crossed paths. I stayed on a few weeks longer, then handed in my resignation. No party, no farewell email, just gone. It should have ended there, but I kept dreaming about her. Not ghosts, not anything like that, just memories. Her head jerking when I hit the brakes, the back of her coat as she walked into the office, the way she smelled like powder and cold perfume. I'd wake up gasping, heart racing. I felt watched, not haunted, not cursed, just like I was still in that moment, still behind the wheel. It was eating at me even if no one blamed me, so I went north. I had an old tent from a trip I took years ago, still held up though the poles were rusty. I packed a cooler, my folding chair, a tarp, a couple small gas canisters, a cast iron pan, and a big hunting knife I'd never used. I told myself I was just going to get out of town for a bit, just clear my head. I headed up toward the Ontario wilderness, near the edge of Algonquin Park. Not one of the big public campgrounds, somewhere quieter. I found an old forestry road a few hours outside of Huntsville, barely used, with no signs, no gates, and nothing on Google Maps past a certain bend. I drove until my car couldn't go anymore, then parked it on a patch of gravel and walked another 30 minutes into the bush with my gear strapped to my back. The air felt clean, sharp, that kind of cold that wakes you up behind your eyes. The leaves were all turning red, gold, and orange. The floor of the woods was soft with rot and pine needles. I found a small flat spot near a shallow stream and pitched the tent. No one for miles, no cell signal. That was the point. I stayed quiet for the first couple of days. Ate beans and oatmeal, boiled water, built a fire when I could find dry wood. The ground was rough and the nights were colder than I expected, but I didn't mind it. It was honest. No beeping, no screens, no coworkers. Just wind, water, birds, and my thoughts. By the 4th day, I started to roam farther from camp. I wasn't trying to find anything. I just wanted to move. My legs ached from crouching and sleeping on thin foam. Around noon, I followed the stream uphill, where the land sloped into a shallow valley. The trees were older there, taller, thicker. Birch and sugar maple gave way to darker pine. The light thinned. I walked for maybe an hour. That's when I found the cabin. It wasn't marked on any maps I had. Just a small gray-brown box sitting under a huge black spruce, half hidden by the slope. The walls were old but intact, the roof slightly caved on one side, the door closed. A faded metal stovepipe jutted from the back. The windows were boarded, but not recently. I could tell no one had been out there in a long time. There was no path, no trash, no woodpile. Just that cabin, quiet and still. I should have left, but I didn't. I walked a circle around it, slowly. The door had a rusted handle but no lock. I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled like dry earth, dust, and old wood. There was a single cot on the left, covered in a rotted wool blanket. A crate of yellowing books. A metal table. A kerosene lamp. Everything was coated in grime and mouse droppings. In the corner sat a green thermos and a pair of rubber boots. There were 3 chipped mugs on a shelf, and under the table, a set of bent forks and spoons in a jar. It wasn't just an old shack. Someone had lived here. Not long-term, maybe, but long enough to leave things behind. I didn't connect the dots until I saw the picture frame. It was under the cot, half buried in dust. I pulled it out, wiped the glass with my sleeve. It was a photograph, grainy, sun-faded. A woman sitting on a wooden porch, holding a mug in her lap. Short hair, big smile, wide coat with a floral pattern. It was Jean. It hit me like a gut punch. My knees went loose and I sat down hard on the edge of the cot. I stared at the photo, trying to make sense of it. Her smile, her hands, the pattern on her coat. I knew that face. I knew those eyes. She had come here. Maybe not recently, but she had. I checked the books. Most were old field guides and some paperback novels. One of the guides had her name scribbled inside the front cover in faded blue ink. J. Weston. That was her last name. Weston. The cold in the cabin suddenly felt heavier. The air had weight. My ears felt plugged, like the pressure had shifted. I stayed just a few more minutes, then walked back fast. Not running, just fast. I told myself I'd stumbled into a coincidence. A random cabin, maybe used by locals. Maybe someone donated the books. Maybe I just imagined her in the photo. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my stomach. That sinking twist that tells you when something's not right. Back at camp, I couldn't relax. My thoughts kept circling. Why would she have been up here? Why wouldn't David, her son, my boss, ever mention that his mom had a cabin in the woods? Why leave it so far off any path? That night, I didn't sleep. Every small noise outside the tent made me flinch. A branch snapping, leaves rustling. Once, I thought I heard a faint creak, like wood shifting under weight, but the wind was picking up. Could have been anything. At dawn, I packed up. I didn't care that I had planned to stay longer. I wanted out. I rolled my gear fast and heavy, didn't eat breakfast, didn't even clean up the fire pit. As I was heading back to the car, I had to pass near the cabin again. I thought about skirting around it, giving it a wide berth, but something pulled at me, a need to understand. So I went back. The door was still shut. Inside, nothing had changed. Same boots, same thermos, same photograph, but I noticed something I hadn't before. Behind the crate of books, there was a short, narrow hatch in the wall, almost like a crawlspace door. I don't know how I missed it earlier. It had a simple wooden handle and was nailed shut with 2 small, rusty tacks. I don't know what made me pull them out, but I did. The hatch creaked open, revealing a shallow space lined with old blankets. It looked like someone had slept there recently. The fabric was too clean.
No dust.
No mouse droppings. No smell of rot. And in the back corner, something metal glinted in the light. A car key. I picked it up. It had a plastic fob. A Honda logo. Just one key on the ring. My stomach clenched. Jean had driven a red Honda Civic, the same model I'd seen outside the office a dozen times. The same car that was towed away after the accident. But this key wasn't rusted. It wasn't old. It looked like it had been used in the last year. I don't know how long I stood there holding it. Eventually I put it back, shut the hatch, pulled the tacks back in with my fingers. I didn't want to know more. Not really. I left the cabin and didn't look back. When I got to the car, I drove fast. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods, past the paved roads, back on the highway with the trees shrinking in my rear view. I didn't tell anyone. Not the police. Not David. Not anyone. I didn't go back to the area again. I never figured out why she had a cabin there, or why it looked like someone had been living in it recently. I never learned who that second sleeping spot belonged to. Maybe it was hers. Maybe it was someone else's. But I've stopped trying to guess. All I know is that I passed by something I was never supposed to find, and it changed me. I still see her sometimes. Not in dreams, but in the corners of old parking lots, in the glint of a red Civic tail light, in the quiet look of an older woman walking alone with a purpose I can't understand. I didn't mean to find her cabin, and I don't think she meant for anyone to find it either, but I did. And now I live with that, every single day. I was 34 when I decided to camp on Graveyard Ridge. The name sounds dramatic, I know, but it's what the locals had always called it. I didn't grow up anywhere near it, but I'd heard stories online and seen a few low-quality drone videos. Nothing strange, just wide shots of windswept hills, scrub brush, and an old stone cemetery that sat near the edge of the plateau. It was somewhere west of Glendo, Wyoming, about 10 miles out on a dirt road that barely looked like a road anymore. The land there is open and lonely, with long rolling grass and the kind of silence that makes you hear your own breathing. It wasn't touristy. There were no signs or maps.
No markers.
No rangers. Just land, sky, and the graves. I wasn't out there on a dare or some childish adventure. I'd been living out of my truck for a couple months, camping and moving around while I sorted out some stuff. A long relationship had ended badly. I didn't have work lined up after quitting my job in Idaho. I wasn't looking for answers in some dramatic way, but I needed to be alone for a while to let the noise of everything settle. And I liked the isolation. I liked the kind of places where my phone didn't work. I got to the trailhead in the afternoon. There wasn't really a parking lot, just a flat stretch of dirt before the path got too narrow. I packed light, a one-man tent, a bedroll, 2 water bottles, trail food, a windbreaker, and a flashlight. No firewood because it was too dry up there and I wasn't planning on getting fined if someone happened to spot smoke. I also had my hunting knife, just in case, and a small hatchet that I usually took camping. The sky was overcast and the wind was already picking up when I left the truck behind. The trail was barely more than a depression in the grass, but the shape of the land was easy to follow. After a short climb up a narrow ridge, I saw it, about a quarter-mile off, ringed by low stones and rusting fence posts, was the cemetery. There were no trees, no signs of upkeep, just the jagged shapes of worn markers sticking out of the dry grass, maybe 30 or 40 of them, scattered in no particular order. Some tilted, some broken, a few taller than the rest. The place looked old, like something out of a photograph you'd see in a county museum. I pitched my tent just off the west edge of the graveyard. I didn't want to be disrespectful or weird about it, but I also didn't want to camp too far from the landmark. I'd driven a long way to see this place. I figured I'd stay the night and head back in the morning, maybe hike around a bit if the weather held. I took a slow walk through the graves before it got dark. Most of the markers had no legible names left, just initials or eroded dates. The ones I could read said things like W/P 1889 or Sister MJ 1877. One of them had a metal cross wired to a wooden stake. That was the only fresh thing out there, and even it looked like it had been there a while. That night, the wind was constant. Not a howling wind, but the steady kind that never lets up. My tent shifted and rattled, even though I'd staked it deep. I lay in my sleeping bag with the zipper drawn up to my chin, listening to it flap. The sky had gone black without a moon. No stars. Felt like I was inside a box. I couldn't hear insects or owls, just wind. At some point, I fell asleep. What woke me up was the sound of metal. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was sharp and quick, like the rattle of a chain link fence or something dragging against rusted wire. Then it stopped. I lay still. I wasn't scared exactly, just alert. I listened. The wind was still going, maybe even harder now. But then I heard it again. A short rattle, a metallic scrape, then silence. I sat up and reached for my flashlight. The air inside the tent was freezing cold. I'd left the top flap unzipped for airflow, and the wind was blowing straight through the mesh. I turned on the light and aimed it around the tent's interior. Nothing. I looked down through the mesh toward the graveyard. That's when I saw a shape. It was hard to tell how far away it was. Maybe 20 yards? Maybe more. It was standing, definitely standing, between two grave markers. At first, I thought it might be a fence post or a tree stump, but the longer I stared, the more I was sure it was a person. The figure didn't move. It just stood there.
No flashlight. No lantern.
Just a black shape in the dark. I didn't move. My hand went to the knife beside my sleeping bag. I kept watching, and then it bent over. I watched it slowly lean forward at the waist, like someone inspecting something on the ground. It held that shape for maybe 5 seconds. Then it straightened, then turned, then took 2 steps to the left, and bent over again. It was inspecting the graves. I didn't breathe, couldn't. Something in me said not to move, not to make noise. The figure repeated the motion 3 more times. Bend, pause, straighten, move, bend. Each time, it seemed to be checking a different grave. Eventually, it walked directly away from me, past the edge of the graveyard and out of sight behind a low rise. I waited. I sat still for almost an hour. I don't know how long exactly, it felt like forever. I didn't hear anything else. No more metal sounds.
No footsteps.
Nothing. By the time the sun started to rise, I was still wide awake, still in the same spot. My legs were sore. My hands were cold from gripping the knife. I waited until the light was strong enough to see clearly, then unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The wind had stopped. I walked straight to where I'd seen the figure. The ground was dry and hard, so there weren't many footprints. But near a marker with the initials L1883, I found a scuffed place in the dirt. Not a print exactly, but something had definitely disturbed the ground. Just beside it was a bent piece of rusted wire, maybe from one of the old fence lines. That was probably what had made the metallic sound. I circled the whole cemetery and then walked out past the low rise where the figure had disappeared. There was nothing.
No tent. No footprints.
No vehicle tracks. Just grass and more open land. That day, I didn't pack up. I should have, but I didn't. I told myself it could have been another hiker. Someone who wandered up here, same as me. Maybe they couldn't sleep and just walked around. Still, the way they moved, the slow bending, the silence, it didn't feel like a hiker. I stayed close to camp that day, ate a cold breakfast, read a paperback, took short walks but didn't wander far. I tried not to look at the graveyard. I told myself I'd leave the next morning. That night I didn't sleep, not even a little. The wind was back, harder than before. The tent shook like it might rip. I lay on my back with the flashlight in my hand and the knife tucked beside my ribs. Around 2 a.m., I heard the sound again. Metal. Scrape. Pause. Scrape again. I turned off the flashlight. I didn't want to draw attention. I slid to the front of the tent and looked out through the mesh. The figure was back, but this time it wasn't alone. There were two of them, standing side by side, not moving, not bending, just watching. I couldn't see their faces or anything like that, just dark outlines in the wind, framed by the tombstones. They stood there for a long time. Then one of them moved, a slow, dragging step forward. Then a second step. Then it bent just like before. They were doing it again, inspecting the graves. One bent while the other stood. Then they switched. Then both walked slowly to the left and started over, like a slow ritual.
No noise.
No light, just wind and the scrape of old wire. I stayed still all night. When the sun rose, they were gone. That morning, I packed everything. I didn't eat. I didn't stop. I got my tent down in under 5 minutes. I folded nothing. I shoved it all into my pack and left. I hiked down without looking back. When I reached the truck, I drove 10 miles before I even checked the rearview mirror. I didn't tell anyone at the time. What was there to say? I didn't see a crime. I didn't see anything I could explain. But I felt something. I felt it deep in my chest, like a warning you only get once. 3 months later, I saw a post on a backcountry forum. A guy asking if anyone had camped near Graveyard Ridge. He said he found broken ground and fresh wire. Said his trail cam picked up strange movement at night, two shapes, slow moving, low to the ground. He didn't go back either. I still camp, but I stay in the woods now. I keep close to towns. I check maps for old cemeteries and avoid them. I don't care how small or abandoned they are. I've learned something about places like that. Something simple. Sometimes you're not supposed to watch. Sometimes you're the one being watched. And sometimes they come back the second night. I never imagined one camping trip could turn into something I'd remember forever. A story I'd carry in my mind like a warning. It was the summer of 2018, and I was 28 years old. I'd taken a week off work, craving a break from the city noise and the endless deadlines. The plan was simple. Head deep into the Pine Hollow National Forest in northern Minnesota, set up a camp, and spend some days alone with nature. No phone signal, no internet, just me and the woods. I arrived in the late afternoon, after driving through winding roads that grew narrower and rougher the closer I got to the forest's heart. The sun was starting its slow fall behind the thick trees, painting the sky orange and pink. I pulled over near a small clearing by a creek, a place I had found on an old forest map tucked inside a hiking guide. It wasn't a popular campsite. In fact, it seemed mostly untouched, just the way I liked it. I unloaded my gear, a tent, sleeping bag, a small stove, enough food for the week, water, and some basic tools. I always kept my survival knife close, strapped to my belt, not for any crazy reason, but because it gave me a bit of peace of mind. I set up my tent facing the creek, the water's gentle babble already calming after the long drive. The forest was alive with sound, birds chirping their last songs of the day, insects buzzing, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the bushes. The air smelled fresh and earthy. I built a small campfire, careful to keep it contained, and sat back to enjoy the last light fading through the trees. As night fell, the forest transformed. The canopy above blocked out most of the moonlight, leaving patches of darkness that seemed to shift and move with the wind. I heard owls calling, distant and eerie, but nothing felt threatening. Still, a quiet tension settled in me, a feeling that's hard to explain, but anyone who's spent time alone in the wild knows it. I slept soundly the first night. The soft murmur of the creek, the cool night air, and the rhythmic chirping of crickets made it easy. I woke early the next morning, stretched, and started a small fire for breakfast. The days passed much the same. hiking through the woods, fishing in the creek, reading a book, and watching the wildlife. It was peaceful, exactly what I wanted. But on the third day, something shifted. It started with the sounds. The animals went silent in the early evening.
No birds, no insects.
Just the creek, still flowing. But now the forest was unnervingly quiet. The wind stopped completely. Even the usual crackling of dry leaves underfoot seemed to have vanished. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was normal, maybe a storm coming or animals hiding. I kept my fire going longer that night, and I noticed something else. Footprints. Large, heavy footprints, unlike any animal I knew, pressed into the soft earth near my camp. They weren't human either. The toes were long and spread apart, the shape awkward and uneven. I circled the area carefully but saw no other signs. No broken branches or discarded items. I didn't sleep much that night. Every crack and pop from the forest floor made me tense. My mind raced, trying to come up with explanations. Could it be a bear? But I knew bear tracks, and these were different, bigger and oddly shaped. Maybe someone was playing a prank, but I was alone on this trail for miles. The next morning, I decided to hike to a ranger station about 10 miles away. I thought if someone was near my camp, I could get help or at least warn someone. The hike was tough, the terrain rough and slippery in spots. As I walked, I kept my eyes on the ground, looking for more signs. Near a fallen tree, I found more prints, leading away from my camp deeper into the forest. The prints were fresh. I hesitated but kept following, heart pounding. The further I went, the more I realized I was not alone out here. By midday, I reached the ranger station. An old, small wooden building with peeling paint. No one was there. I knocked, called out, but no answer. Inside, it was empty, cold, and abandoned. Maps and some supplies lay scattered, and a dusty logbook showed no recent entries. That's when I heard it. A low growl from just outside the window. I froze, staring out into the dense trees. Something large moved slowly between the trunks, just out of clear sight. It was big, maybe larger than a man, but I couldn't make out details. My skin prickled, and I quietly backed out of the station, heading back the way I came. The sun was starting to lower again, and I knew I needed to get back to camp before dark. The thought of that creature, whatever it was, made my steps quicken. I stayed on the path, trying not to make noise. By the time I got back to my tent, dusk had settled fully. I packed quickly, deciding to leave immediately. I didn't want to spend another night here with that unknown thing lurking around. I grabbed my pack and started walking toward my car. Then I heard it behind me, footsteps. Heavy and slow, like someone was following but careful not to hurry. I stopped, heart in my throat, listening hard. The forest was silent except for those steps. I moved again, faster now, keeping my eyes on the path. The steps mirrored mine, never getting closer but never disappearing either. Panic rose inside me, cold and sharp. I forced myself to stay calm, thinking about what I could do if this thing came at me. After what felt like hours, the footsteps vanished. I kept walking, finally breaking through the tree line to the road. My car was there, shining in the fading light. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. Driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the forest looked calm again, as if nothing had followed me. The next day, I called the park rangers from a nearby town and told them what I had seen and heard. They said they hadn't had any reports of unusual animals or people in the area, but promised to check it out. I never went back to Pine Hollow. That summer trip, meant to be a quiet retreat, became a lesson in respect for the wild and its secrets. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't ghosts or monsters from stories, but the unknown. Things that live in the shadows and leave only footprints to tell their tale. It was the summer of 2016, and I had just turned 34. At the time, I was working a quiet IT job in Manchester, but I had been feeling burned out for a while. The days were blending into each other, and the screens, the emails, the fluorescent office lights, they were starting to close in. I decided I needed a break from people and screens and plans. I figured a short solo camping trip would be just the thing to reset my head. I'd been up to the Scottish Highlands once, years before, with some friends, and I remembered how peaceful it felt. No traffic, no phone signals, no buildings for miles, just rolling land and thick woods. I picked out a small spot not far from Loch Arable on the north coast, a place called Altvullen. It was just a patch of land near a forest edge with a small dirt road leading in. I found it using satellite view online. No trails, no campgrounds, just wild land. It seemed perfect. I left early on a Wednesday morning in July, hoping to beat the weekend hikers. I drove my 2007 Vauxhall Astra, packed with my old tent, camping gear, water, food for 3 days, and a small first aid kit. I also brought a new waterproof jacket I had bought the week before. The forecast had mentioned light rain, which I didn't mind. I thought it might even add to the feeling of being away from it all. The drive took about 10 hours with breaks. The roads grew narrower as I moved farther north. The town sparser, the skies wider. By the time I reached the last stretch of gravel road leading to the spot I'd marked, the sun was low and the sky was getting that cold pink tone it sometimes gets before rain. The road was rough and barely wide enough for one car, and it twisted between hills and patches of trees. I parked the car near a ditch, about 30 yards off the forest edge. I set up my tent quickly, just a simple dome with a rainfly. The ground was soft but not too wet. It smelled like pine and moss and something a little metallic like iron. I boiled some water for a packet meal, ate in silence, and just listened to the breeze moving through the trees. Felt good, isolated, clean. I read a bit from a book I had brought, zipped up the tent, and drifted off sometime after dark. The first night passed quietly, just the occasional rustle of wind or a bird. I woke early, stretched, and walked around the area. There was a stream maybe a 10-minute walk away, and I filled up my filter bottle there. I didn't see another soul all day, just some small animal tracks in the mud and a buzzard overhead. I didn't mind the silence. It felt like my brain was finally starting to unclench. The rain started just after dinner that evening, a light tapping at first. I was in my tent reading when it picked up into a steadier rhythm. It made the forest sound deeper, like everything was breathing slower. I fell asleep listening to it. I woke sometime in the middle of the night. At first, I wasn't sure why. The rain was still falling steadily, and the tent was dry inside. But something had pulled me out of sleep. I lay there still for a moment, listening. It wasn't fear exactly, but there was a tightness in my chest. My ears were searching for something, I just didn't know what. Then I heard it, something other than the rain. It was faint, a crunch, then another, soft, deliberate. Not wind, not falling branches. It sounded like feet on gravel. Slow, one step, pause, another, like someone walking without wanting to be heard. I held my breath. I listened harder. The steps didn't come closer. They just stayed, maybe 20 or 30 yards from the tent, behind where I had parked the car. Then silence again, only rain. I waited. Minutes passed. I heard nothing else. I tried to tell myself it was probably an animal. A deer maybe even a fox. But it had sounded heavier, slower. I forced myself to breathe normally and eventually drifted back off. By morning, the rain had eased to a mist. I unzipped the tent and stepped out slowly. The grass was soaked, and the sky was a flat gray. Everything smelled like wet bark and soil. I walked around the camp. Nothing looked disturbed, but I couldn't shake the unease. It sat low in my stomach like a cold stone. I walked toward the gravel road where I'd parked. I scanned the ground without really knowing what I was looking for. I found it about 20 feet behind the car. Partial footprint, just the heel and part of the tread from a boot, pressed into the wet gravel and thin mud. Not mine, too wide. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. I looked around, but the rest of the ground didn't show anything clear. Just flattened grass here and there. Could have been anything, but that one print stayed with me. I didn't pack up that day. I wanted to believe it was just a hiker passing by. Maybe someone using the road to get through the woods. I didn't want to feel stupid cutting the trip short. I spent the day closer to the tent, made a fire when the rain paused, and stayed alert. That night, the rain came down harder. I stayed zipped up tight in the tent, light off. I lay awake for hours, just listening. At some point, I drifted off. Then I heard something again. A sharp noise this time. Not a footstep, more like a scrape. Metal on metal. I sat up fast. My heart was hammering now. I pressed my ear to the side of the tent. Came again. A kind of quick, soft rattle. It was the sound of my car door handle. I didn't move. I just sat there, breathing through my nose, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. Then the sound stopped. More silence. No footsteps this time, just the rain. I didn't hear anything else for what felt like hours. At dawn, I got out of the tent fast and moved straight to the car. The handle on the driver's side had fresh scratches, small, horizontal ones, like someone had tried to pull it open with something, a tool or a key. The door hadn't opened, and everything inside looked untouched, but the scratches were new. That was enough for me. I packed everything in record time. Tent down, bags in the boot. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just wanted to be gone. The gravel road was slick from the rain, and I drove slow. The trees pressed in tight, and every now and then I'd see something through the trunks. A shape, a movement, but it was always just a branch swaying or a patch of dark. I didn't stop until I hit the proper road 2 hours later. I kept driving south until the hills gave way to flatter land and houses started to show up again. Back in Manchester, it took me a while to shake it off. I told myself it could have been anyone. A lost hiker, a hunter, someone sleeping rough who thought the car might have food inside. But the fact they had stood that close at night and didn't say anything, that was what stayed with me. They didn't knock, didn't call out, just watched maybe. Weeks later, I cleaned out the boot of the car and found something wedged under the spare tire. A bit of plastic. It looked like a snapped piece from a SIM card tray. I hadn't seen it before. It was scratched and cracked like it had been stepped on. No reason it should have been there. I hadn't used the back part of the boot for anything but my gear. I threw it out. I didn't want to think too hard about it. I haven't gone solo camping since. Not because I'm scared of the woods or the rain or being alone. I just realized something on that trip, that it's not the wild you have to watch for. It's the people who move through it without being seen. The ones who don't want to be heard. The ones who don't belong there, same as you, but are out there anyway. Watching, waiting. That trip gave me the peace I was looking for, in a way, but not the kind I expected. It taught me that peace isn't just about silence or nature. Sometimes it's knowing when to leave, when to listen to your gut, when to pack up and go, even if you don't know exactly why. I listen more now, and I don't ignore the sound of gravel shifting in the dark. It was the summer of 2014. I had just turned 32, single, and in between jobs after leaving a warehouse management position in Montevideo. I wasn't in a rush to find the next thing, and I had a little money saved, so I decided I'd take some time and do something I hadn't done in years. Go camping. Not the kind of pull your truck next to a fire pit camping, but the real thing. Pack a bag, get deep into nature, stay a week, maybe more. No cell service, no distractions, just me and the wild. I settled on a remote spot in the western part of Uruguay, near the Brazilian border, a stretch of thick forest close to the Rio Aquarium. I had been in that area once years before with some friends, but this time I wanted to go further than we had dared, deeper into the land. I took a bus from the city to Artigas, then hitched a ride to a small village near the forest edge. From there, I hiked alone. The plan was to set up camp for 7 or 8 days, fish from the river, maybe even try to trap something if I was feeling adventurous. I brought enough food to last about 5 days without supplementing it, and the rest I'd have to get from the land. It was a bit risky, but I wanted the challenge. I set up camp about 6 hours hike from the last sign of civilization, way off any official trails. The forest was thick, but not impossible to move through. I found a nice clearing, a flat space near a bend in the river, where the trees opened up just enough for sunlight to come in most of the day. It looked like a place no one had touched in years. There were no signs of old fires, no trash, no chopped stumps, just untouched wilderness. The first day and night were peaceful. I set up my tent, started a small fire, cooked some rice and beans I'd brought, and sat by the river for hours. The sound of the water mixed with birds calling in the trees. I felt calm, even proud. I was finally doing what I always said I would, disconnecting and surviving alone. But the peace didn't last long. On the second morning, I went walking upstream to look for a better fishing spot. About 1 kilometer away, I found a half-rotted log that stretched out into the water, making a kind of natural pier. I tried my line there and caught a decent-sized catfish. As I was cleaning it on a flat rock, I noticed something strange across the water, just for a second. A flash of movement, not an animal, but not quite human-looking either. It was more the way it moved, slow but deliberate, like it didn't want to be seen but didn't care enough to fully hide. I stared at the spot, but nothing moved again. I figured it must have been my eyes playing tricks. Forests do that to you. Shadows bend, trees sway, and you start seeing things. I forced the thought out of my head and went back to camp. That night, I woke up suddenly just after midnight. No sound. That's what did it. No bugs, no wind, nothing. Just total silence. Felt wrong. The forest never really goes silent unless something's not right. I didn't hear footsteps or twigs breaking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I stayed inside the tent and waited. Eventually, the sounds came back. First a bird call, then the chirping of insects. I told myself it had just been a big predator nearby, maybe a jaguar or wild boar. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I walked downstream to collect some dry wood. About 50 meters from my tent, I found footprints. Bare feet, adult-sized. One set, maybe 2. At first I thought maybe they were mine from the day before, but they were fresh. The top layer of the dirt was still moist, and I could see where the edge of one print had collapsed slightly, like someone had just passed by that morning. I hadn't walked that direction since I'd arrived. I followed the tracks for a bit, but they faded into the underbrush after a short distance. That was the first real moment I thought about packing up. I sat on a log for a long time with my boots off, just staring into the trees, thinking. I hadn't seen anyone. I was hours away from any road. The odds of someone else being out here at the same time as me, in this exact spot, were nearly 0. But I told myself maybe a local hunter passed through, or someone fishing the river. I stayed. I told myself I'd give it one more night, but I kept my knife close. That night, I didn't cook. I didn't start a fire. I just ate a protein bar cold and stayed inside the tent. I zipped everything up tight and laid still, listening. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves put me on edge. Around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like a whistle. Just once, short and high. I sat up immediately, heart racing. The sound came from the direction of the river, maybe 30 meters away. I stayed frozen for over an hour. Nothing else came. No voices, no movement, no more sounds. Eventually, I laid back down and stared at the roof of the tent until daylight. In the morning, I checked the area. Nothing obvious. No footprints this time, no disturbed brush. But my gut was telling me I wasn't alone. I started packing up. I was done. As I took down the tent, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On a tree about 10 meters from where I'd been sleeping, someone had scratched into the bark. It was a symbol, almost like a triangle with an X through it. Not natural, not old either. The wood underneath was still pale and fresh. I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't feel like a good sign. I packed fast and started walking the same direction I'd come in from. The forest felt tighter now, darker even though the sun was out. I moved fast, not resting much, just trying to get back to the edge before nightfall. But somewhere along the way, I took a wrong turn. I didn't realize it until I hit a steep hill I didn't remember coming down. I tried to backtrack, but everything started to look the same. Trees, rocks, fallen logs. I'd marked a few trees with little scratches on the way in, but I couldn't find any of them now. My hands were shaking when I checked my compass, and the needle spun weirdly for a second before steadying. I wasn't far enough out for magnetic interference, but I didn't stop to think about it. I picked a direction and kept moving. The sun started dropping. The trees blocked most of the light. I knew I wasn't going to make it out before dark. I stopped in a small hollow and set up the tent again, just the basics this time, no fire, no noise. I ate the last of my cold food and stayed alert. Around midnight, I heard movement. This time, it was closer. Not fast, not loud. Just slow crunches in the dry leaves. I didn't move. I held my knife and barely breathed. The sound circled the tent once, then stopped. A minute later, I heard something even worse. A soft exhale, right near the flap of the tent, like someone breathing just inches away. I didn't dare unzip it. I waited, and after a while, the breathing stopped. The crunching leaves moved away. I didn't sleep. As soon as the light came, I packed again and kept walking. Every time I thought I recognized something, it turned out to be wrong. It took me 2 full days to find the edge of the forest again. I barely ate. I didn't rest much. I just kept moving. When I finally got back to the dirt road near the village, I collapsed on the side and sat for an hour before I had the energy to move again. I flagged down a man on a motorcycle and paid him to take me back to Artigas. Back in the city, I booked a room and stayed indoors for 3 days. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The footprints, the whistling, the breathing, that carved symbol. I told myself it had to be someone living out there. Some hermit, maybe a criminal hiding in the woods. Maybe more than one. Whoever it was, they didn't want me there. They never said a word, never showed themselves fully, but they made it clear. Months later, back home in Montevideo, I looked into it again. I found an old news article about illegal camps in remote parts of Uruguay and southern Brazil. Groups that stayed hidden, avoided contact, and were hostile to outsiders. The article was vague, mostly speculation. Nothing official. No names. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I've never gone camping alone again. And I never will. I was 34 when I went back to the woods alone. It was early October 1998, and the air was already biting cold at night. The kind of cold that made you pull your jacket tighter, even when you thought you were warm enough. I'd been hunting since I was a kid, mostly with my dad and later with my brothers. But this was different. I was going by myself, deep into the hills of western Pennsylvania. Not the kind of place tourists come to, but the kind of place you go to when you want to be truly alone. The plan was simple. I'd hike in about 3 miles from the dirt road, find a good spot to camp near a clearing I'd spotted on an old topo map, and spend the next week hunting deer and maybe a wild turkey if I was lucky. I'd packed my rifle, plenty of ammo, A tent, food, water, a small stove, and my old hunting knife. The usual gear, nothing fancy, but enough to keep me safe and comfortable. The first day of hiking was hard. The trail was overgrown, and the early fall rains had turned the dirt into thick, sticky mud. My boots squelched with every step. I didn't mind. I wanted the roughness, the challenge. The forest was alive with sounds. Leaves rustling in the wind, distant birds calling, the occasional crack of a twig underfoot. The air smelled sharp and earthy, a mix of wet pine and damp soil. When I finally found the clearing, the sun was already low in the sky. It was perfect, open enough to spot deer, but with enough cover around it to hide in. I set up my tent near the edge of the clearing, close to a stand of oak and maple trees that still held onto their red and gold leaves. The colors burned bright in the fading light. I built a fire and cooked a simple meal. Canned beans heated on my little stove, and then sat back against a tree, my rifle resting beside me. The night crept in fast, swallowing the colors and replacing them with deep blues and blacks. I felt a calm settle over me. This was what I needed, time away from the noise of the city, the endless buzz of work and people. That first night, the forest seemed peaceful. The fire crackled, and the stars above were sharp and bright. But as I lay in my tent, listening to the forest's night song, I felt a faint unease. It wasn't fear, not exactly, just a sense that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me. I told myself it was just my imagination. The woods always feel different at night. Shapes shift in the dark, sounds echo in strange ways. I fell asleep thinking about the hunt the next day. Morning came cold and gray. I packed my gear, took a quick look around the clearing, and then slipped quietly into the trees with my rifle. The ground was covered with wet leaves, and every step made a soft crunch. I moved slowly, careful not to scare off any animals. I spotted tracks early on, fresh deer prints in the mud. They were big, probably a buck. I followed them for hours, winding through thick brush and crossing small creeks. The sun broke through the clouds by midday, turning the forest warm and golden. Around 3 p.m., I saw the deer, a large buck standing still in the distance, near a cluster of tall pines. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I raised my rifle, aimed, and waited for the right moment. The buck shifted slightly, caught my scent maybe, and bolted into the trees before I could fire. I cursed under my breath, but didn't give up. The rest of the afternoon, I tracked the buck's path through the woods, but it was like he disappeared into thin air. As dusk fell, I headed back to camp, tired but hopeful. That night, as I lay in my tent, I heard noises. Not the usual forest sounds, something different. Low, slow footsteps, like someone walking carefully through the underbrush. I grabbed my flashlight and peered out, but saw nothing. No movement, no shadows. I shook my head and settled back down, but sleep was hard to come by. The next morning was even colder. Frost covered the leaves and ground. I lit a fire to warm myself and eat breakfast. I felt the weight of solitude pressing down on me. It was one thing to be alone in the woods during the day, quite another at night. I decided to move camp closer to a small creek I'd seen the day before, hoping for better hunting and fresh water. I broke down my tent and packed everything up. As I walked through the forest, I felt eyes on me again, that same strange feeling from before. I looked behind trees and into shadows, but saw nothing. By mid-afternoon, I set up camp near the creek. It was a quieter place, the water gurgling softly as it ran over rocks. I gathered dry wood for a fire and started cooking some canned stew. I tried to ignore the growing sense of being watched. That evening, as the fire burned low, I heard the footsteps again, closer this time and slower. My skin prickled. I grabbed my rifle and shone my flashlight into the dark trees. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then I saw it. a figure crouched low and still, just beyond the firelight. I froze. The figure was too dark to see clearly, but I could make out the shape of a man. His face was hidden by shadow, but his eyes reflected the flashlight's beam. He didn't move, didn't speak. I held my breath, gripping my rifle tight. Slowly, the man stood up and stepped back into the woods. I watched him disappear among the trees, my heart hammering. I sat there for hours, firelight flickering, ears straining for any sound. When dawn came, the man was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, I stayed alert. I hunted carefully, avoiding open spaces and sticking to the denser woods. I found more tracks that didn't belong to deer, human footprints too large and deep to be mine. On the fourth night, I woke suddenly to the sound of something scraping against a tree near my tent. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, heart racing. The beam caught the rough bark, and I saw fresh claw marks gouged deep into it. Not animal claws, something else. The fear I felt was raw and sharp. I realized then that I wasn't just being watched. Someone was following me. Not a friendly hunter or ranger, but someone with another purpose. I stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight scanning the woods, rifle ready. Morning never felt so good. I packed up immediately and started hiking back to the road. I didn't care about the hunt anymore. All I wanted was to get out. The hike back felt endless. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made me jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but I never saw the man again. I imagined him watching, waiting, somewhere out there in the shadows. When I finally reached my truck, I locked the doors and started the engine without hesitation. As I drove away, the forest swallowed the dirt road behind me. I never went back to those woods alone again. It was the summer of 2007 when I decided to go camping alone. I was 28 years old at the time, working a regular office job in Portland, Oregon, and I was desperate to get away from the noise and stress of the city. I had been camping before, but mostly in groups or with family. This trip was different. I wanted solitude, a chance to disconnect completely and find some peace in the wilderness. So, I chose a spot in the Cascade Mountains about 2 hours east of the city. It was a place I'd heard about from a coworker who swore by its quiet beauty and the good fishing in the nearby river. I packed my old Jeep with everything I thought I'd need. A tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, water filters, a small stove, fishing gear, and a basic first aid kit. I made sure to bring extra batteries for my flashlight and my phone, even though I didn't expect much signal out there. The Jeep rumbled along the winding roads until I reached the trailhead. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and earth. It was early morning, the sun just beginning to burn through the trees. I unloaded my gear, slung my backpack on, and started walking up the narrow trail. The hike in was about 4 miles through dense forest, tall evergreens, and thick underbrush. The ground was soft with fallen needles and damp moss, and the sound of birds and small animals filled the air. The trail was quiet, except for the crunch of my boots and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Every now and then, a squirrel darted across the path or a woodpecker hammered at a tree trunk. I felt a kind of calm settle over me as I walked, the city and its worries already starting to feel far away. After about an hour and a half, I reached a clearing beside a small, slow-moving river. It was perfect, a flat spot with soft grass and enough space to pitch my tent close to the water. The river's surface reflected the bright blue sky, and the sun warmed my back. I set up camp quickly, feeling the familiar routine of spreading out my tarp, pitching the tent poles, and securing everything with stakes. I took my time making a small fire pit with stones I found nearby. The area felt untouched, quiet except for nature's sounds, and I could feel myself relaxing deeper. That first afternoon, I spent hours fishing in the river. The water was clear and cold, and I watched small fish dart beneath the surface. I managed to catch a couple, enough for dinner. Cooking over the fire felt good. The slow, steady work of cleaning, gutting, and cooking the fish soothed me. I ate slowly, savoring the simple meal under the open sky. As dusk fell, the forest around me darkened, and the stars started to appear, one by one. I lay in my tent that night, listening to the river's gentle rush and the distant calls of owls. The peace was almost overwhelming. The next day was warm and bright. I woke early, brewed some coffee on my small stove, and packed a light day pack. I planned to explore deeper into the forest and maybe find a better fishing spot upstream. The woods were thick, with towering pines and a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air smelled fresh and earthy. As I walked, I noticed the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a branch. Small animals scurried away as I passed, and I caught sight of a deer disappearing into the trees. The trail I followed was faint, overgrown in parts, but still visible. It twisted alongside the river, sometimes climbing rocky banks, other times dipping close to the water. I felt good physically, my legs strong from the hike in, my mind clear. I stopped frequently to take pictures, to drink water, or to just sit and listen. The forest seemed alive and ancient, a place where time moved differently. About halfway through my day hike, I reached a narrow gorge where the river narrowed sharply and tumbled over rocks into a small waterfall. It was beautiful, the water frothing white and cool spray filling the air. I decided to rest here, sitting on a large flat rock close to the edge. The sound of rushing water was loud but soothing. I took a small snack from my pack and watched the water dance in the sunlight. That's when I noticed something off. About 100 yards downstream, near a bend in the river, I saw a figure. At first, I thought it was a fisherman like me, but the figure didn't move much. It was standing oddly still, almost like a statue. The clothing was dark, blending into the shadows of the trees, and the person's head was turned away, looking downriver. I didn't want to spook anyone, so I stayed quiet and still, watching. After a few minutes, the figure moved slowly, stepping carefully along the bank. I decided it was time to turn back. I had seen enough. The light was beginning to soften, and I wanted to be back at camp before dark. I packed my things and started hiking back along the trail. The walk back was uneventful at first. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Birds quieted, and the air grew cooler. I felt a strange tension creeping in, like I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, the loneliness of the woods making me uneasy, but the feeling didn't go away. About halfway back, I heard a noise behind me. A snapping branch, soft footsteps on the leaves. I stopped and turned quickly, flashlight in hand, scanning the darkening trees. Nothing. I took a deep breath and kept walking, trying to stay calm. The footsteps came again, steady and slow, matching my pace. Quickened my step, heart pounding. The trail was narrow and the trees thickening. I glanced back again. Still nothing visible, but the sounds were clear now. Someone was following me. Panic set in. I grabbed a sturdy stick from the ground, ready to defend myself if needed. I tried calling out, but my voice caught in my throat. The footsteps behind me kept pace, no faster, no slower. I broke into a jog, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly through the trees. The footsteps matched every movement. I reached my camp in a few minutes, breath ragged and sweat cooling on my skin. I hurried to my tent and slammed the flap shut. Inside, I grabbed my knife and flashlight, listening. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. I sat completely still, heart racing. The fire pit was cold, no sign of a fire. The figure had followed me here. Minutes passed. The sounds outside were gone. I didn't dare leave the tent until the sky was fully dark. Then I gathered my gear quickly, packed everything, and made a plan to leave first thing in the morning. That night was restless. I kept my knife close and my flashlight ready. Every small noise, a branch falling, an animal moving, set me on edge. I slept in short bursts, waking to the sounds of the forest, imagining eyes watching from the dark. Morning came with pale light filtering through the tent fabric. I ate quickly, drank water, and packed up. As I loaded my pack into the Jeep, I scanned the woods once more. No sign of the figure. I started the engine and drove slowly down the dirt road. I told myself the figure was probably a hunter or another camper. Someone just as surprised to see me as I was to see them. Maybe they had been watching for game or trying to stay hidden. The forest held all kinds of people. I never saw the figure again, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me long after I returned to the city. I told no one about the trip, partly because it sounded crazy, partly because I wasn't sure what I had seen or experienced. But that time in the woods taught me something about solitude, how it can bring peace, but also reveal how vulnerable we really are. I never went back to that exact spot. Instead, I found other places to camp, safer, more open areas. But I never forgot that feeling of being followed, that quiet, steady presence just beyond the edge of the firelight. Looking back now, I realize that wilderness is not just about nature's beauty, but also about the people who share it, sometimes in ways you don't expect. And sometimes, the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. They're the unknown people, the ones who watch quietly from the shadows.